Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Resilient Riches. I look at resilience and I look at somebody who has an ability to listen to the masses, someone that has an ability to talk to people. And instead of just talking and talking and talking, they're able to take what they learn, what they see, and create information from that point, create leadership from that point. Robin, a good friend of mine, I've known Robin for almost 2 years now, has worked in advertising, which is understanding your branding, has created focus groups, has created research for companies, and is on the next stage of her, honestly, career, and now moving into a level of spiritual journeys for people. We are very religious people, so we understand that, but we really appreciate, number one, Robin, for you coming in. You've been, we were talking a little bit before about if I found your one word, it would be kindness. And I've only known that from you. I've said so many times, I said to you, there's few people that give so much of their time without asking for anything in return. And you've always been that person. And the reason why is because you're a listener, you're an ability to give, and you're an ability to constantly do for others. So we really appreciate you coming on. We're excited to have you, and we're excited for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Yair.
So, Rob, can you give us a little background, about 2-minute background about where you were before and where you are right now?
Sure. I've been kind of a serial entrepreneur, which, as many of us kind of admit, what that means is we're basically serially unemployable when you get right down to it.
Makes sense.
And my first business was an advertising agency. It's called Mad Dogs and Englishmen, and it was kind of a hot, creative scene. And my role in that company, aside from being one of the two partners that owned the company, was that I was something called an account planner. And an account planner was a person who would understand consumers in order to deliver to our clients that understanding, and in order to build our campaigns and our ads around that understanding. And so I got this really lucky kind of start as a working person. My first business, I started when I was 30, as essentially a professional listener, as somebody who really opened up and heard what people wanted and needed from whatever category we were talking about. We might have been talking about television. We might have been talking about clothing, but also really sort of listening to people as people. And I often said back then that I would have been, pardon me if I'm going to use just a slightly naughty word, I would have been such a bitch had I not fallen into this career that forced me to really hear others. And that became just a really important guiding principle for me. So we did the advertising agency for 14 years. And after that was, sort of over and done with, my next business was a brand consultancy. And so again, still a lot of listening to consumers and to audiences, but also really working with my clients to figure out what it was that they wanted to achieve. And then ultimately I pivoted from that business into something that is more technically and truly a research company. And a research company that for a variety of clients does things like tracking studies, does things like focus groups, everything from figuring out how to make a sale more compelling to helping an audience of business people whose primary consumers are professional truckers, helping them really understand what professional truckers want and need. And I'm now just beginning another practice, another business, which will be spiritual counseling and coaching.
You've gone through so many different stages in your life, it sounds like, and it's all has one theme. And we know from our level of spiritualism, it's all about listening. God is talking to you, and how do you listen, and how do you take what God is actually saying to you? But
yes,
you've been doing it for so long. How come it started at 30? What happened at that moment? Because number one, it was not normal, obviously, for women to be in business and to own businesses and be successful. So, as you said, you would have been a real bitch if you couldn't do it for yourself, which was really against the norm. And how did you pivot into starting your own company, and how did you find that listening is actually the way to be successful?
Just before you answer, just before you answer, I just wanted to mention that you should really be privileged. I've also done a lot of pivoting in my career. I've done a number of different things, and yet Yair never lets me tell tell anybody what my whole story is. So just to put that out there, that I'm happy that he's giving you that opportunity.
Well, I'd love to hear your full story. So.
You can do it offline because we only have 45 minutes, not 45 days.
See what I'm up against?
It's tough for you, but no, it's a long. If he had it in a concise version that you can put on like an Instagram clip, it would be great. But he doesn't have that, so he doesn't care, and he goes, "Yeah, I know I'm rambling on, but I'm making you take that." Like he knows he's doing it, so he continues doing it. So that's the problem.
I deny all of that. I deny all of that.
You can deny whatever you want. It's true.
I love the father-son dynamic.
Son-father, we call it. Show. Is it really? All right. So, Robin, please answer the question before my dad rudely interrupted you.
So the starting of that agency was really that I met a person who had a vision and who needed a partner. And that guy is a guy named Nick Cohen. He's a brilliant creative person. And that was what really started that. But the real kind of shift or pivot in my life happened 4 years later. And it's interesting. I was recently reading some old journals from that period of time when I was first, running this advertising agency. And I will say this for other people who run a business and start a business when they're young. There's a point at which you kind of have to recognize that you are both a person and a persona, and that the persona needs to be available to run the business. That, the kinds of relationships that you have with people who work for you sometimes you need to be able to step back from the person into the persona in order to be a leader. But 4 years into the agency, I had a cancer scare. And I was diagnosed with a cancer that was often fatal. And I was thrown back on my inner resources, and I didn't have any. And that really shocked me. I felt unable to tell my parents about my diagnosis because I sort of thought I knew exactly how they'd behave. I thought my father would try to be a hero, and that my mother would try to intellectualize it, and that my siblings, my sister would, see it as some sort of competitive thing. And so I was really very lonely in this situation where I really feared for my life. And these were these journals that I was going back to. I wrote the word fuck about 7,500 times in a journal, having been
How many other words were there?
That was just a bunch of that in a row.
How old were you when this happened? How old were you?
I was 34. 34. And then I had this sort of prophetic dream. I had been writing my dreams down for some time. They were very vivid at that time in my life. And I had this dream, and the dream ended with these words: there will be a drawing contest in San Francisco. Shadings in a building, highly logical. And about 2 days later, I was called by a new client to go to San Francisco. And I thought, that's pretty weird. And in San Francisco, I was walking with a group of people that I knew. And I had this physical experience. My heart opened. I saw a light. I heard a sound. And my heart opened, and it hurt. And I was ashamed because the sound I heard was like the opening of a very rusty door. And I realized just how rusty my heart was. And my heart opened, I saw this light, and I heard a voice. And the voice was Jesus Christ. And what the voice said was, all paths are valid, but I am your path because you think it's stupid. And that, in fact, had been my attitude towards Christianity and towards religion in general, was that I thought it was kind of dumb. And as my heart opened and as I took that in, this flood of recognition that I would be okay, whether I lived or died, hit me. And everything changed from there.
Did you find that from that moment of awakening, that the way you walked and the way you lived life every moment from that point changed?
Absolutely. For instance, my not being able to tell my parents about my cancer diagnosis, I soon really had this simple realization that they were doing the best they could, that they were showing up as best they could in life with me, that they loved me, and that my insistence that what I receive be perfect help was an inhuman insistence,
Yeah, you require, it's very common. You see, we see a lot in financial, it's you go through this really tough financial point and you get to the bottom and you feel so alone.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that really helps is finding something outside of yourself to connect with. Once you do that, and that's what happened with our family, once you do that, you can then, we call it money talks, just having the conversation and opening up the conversation. Once you can do that, you can get yourself out of this. For you, when you're going through cancer, my mom went through cancer, something external affected you. And the only thing that can get you out of that externality is another externality, opening up to God, opening up to religion, opening up to something else other than just yourself, because you cannot control what's going on.
Right. And that opening, for about 2 years after that, I was on fire. My prayers were answered, often in ways that were funny. I once was running late for something. I prayed for a cab as I was running down the stairs of my 5-story walk-up apartment. And I opened the door, and there was literally a cab with no wheels sitting right in front of the door. And there were just a bunch of things like that, right? And I was sort of offered a curriculum, a bit of a mystical curriculum. And that curriculum was largely about the degree to which we are all connected, the degree to which everything is connected. And during that period of time, I also wrote poetry. It sort of just came out of me. Eventually, things sort of slowed down and calmed down a bit. And it was a relief because I had felt like a candle that was burning at both ends. But my life also really changed in some profound ways, one of which was that I left a relationship with a wonderful person, but it was not a good relationship. And restarted a relationship with the man that I'm now married to, who had been my college sweetheart, or one of my college sweethearts might be a better way to put it. That was, very much a move into something that was just going to work better in life. He's not himself a religious person. He's, he's a Jewish man, but not somebody who practices religion in person. But that was part of what we talked about as we were deciding what to do with one another, was would he be okay with the fact that I turned into this sort of freak? And he was like, yeah, I can handle that.
Yeah, I mean, Judaism teaches understanding and acceptance. We don't chase people to convert to Judaism. It's a very different type of religion. A lot of religions are murdering people to make them become religious, to make them go into their religion. Christianity has missionaries, Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, there's a lot of different sects out there but Judaism has a very tough requirement to become Jewish. So one of my best friends, now wife, is from Haiti, and she went to the rabbis and she said, I want to become Jewish. And they said, no, you can't do it. Wow. And she goes, no, I really want to. So she had to come back a few times.
She had to knock on the door.
She had to knock on the door, and then she said, okay, well, this is what I want to do. They said, are you dating somebody who's Jewish? She goes, that's not why I'm converting. He said, the only way that will convert you is if he becomes religious. So my friend, who was never religious, now has become. She then is practicing, is learning Hebrew, but doesn't learn it enough. She goes to the rabbis and they said, okay, read this chapter. Can't read it. Then she doesn't read it well. So the rabbi goes, get out of here.
Wow.
So she leaves. A year later, she comes back fluent in Hebrew.
Wow.
Now they're married. And for us, it was in Judaism, it's very close community. But for us, it was an eye-opening experience when she came, and we all kind of had to interview her to really understand what was going on, because that's just so different than how you're brought up. And while we're talking to her, we realized like she's the real deal.
Yeah.
And you had to accept it. And not only did you have to accept it, you had to have radical acceptance for her new path, and you had to have radical acceptance for my friend's path, which I found to be incredibly eye-opening for Judaism, because it's the outside, no one's allowed in, but once you're in 110%. So it's a different.
Just to clarify, it's a legal requirement in Judaism that if someone approaches us to be Jewish, it's a legal requirement to reject them 3 times.
Wow, very cool.
And my dad also had his own spiritual journey. Dad, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I grew up non-religious. I was conservative, day school. It's like there's 3 types of Judaism, not types, but there's 3 classes, I guess. Orthodox, as you know, we're keeping to all of the commandments. There's 613 commandments, so there's a lot to do. Conservative, this is how I grew up. My parents were conservative, so whatever that looks like. You go. My mother would light candles on Friday night, and then we'd go and have a Shabbat dinner, and then go watch TV. And then in Saturday morning, we go to synagogue for a couple of hours, and then do what we had wanted in the afternoon, and that was basically it. So we're driving, we're using lights. Orthodox, you're not doing that. So, and then there's Reform, which is even less requirements, which my brother is now in Canada. But I guess when I came back in college, I became Orthodox, and through meeting certain people, and just just not to ramble on, as Yair will not allow me to, but just
I control the mute button from here.
Yeah, can you? just to make it short. It's really, there's a certain lack of meaning and direction in your life. So that I felt at that point, and you're in college, you're graduating, but what are you going to do for the rest of your life? What do you want your world to look like? How do you want it to be? I mean, and there's always, as you said also, which I can relate to very closely, there's also usually an event that happens that will spur you onto that. There's no atheists in foxholes, and I don't want to get into my certain details. I don't know if even Yair really knows, but there's always some events that happen that spur you to make you open to that type of open to that reception, similar to what you experienced in San Francisco. Like an awakening, and we call it in Hebrew. It's called the Baal Tshuva. It's called a return to redemption, or return.
It's return to the question, to the answer.
To the answer.
It's why is this happening to me? And there's an answer for that.
Yeah.
And when you
just to end off, in my time, this was like in the 80s, and in my time it was a big movement. Like there was people that would, college students, they would go to India and end up at the Western Wall in Jerusalem, and there was people there that are very famous in my day, at least, that would meet people at the Western Wall and then bring them to a yeshiva, an Orthodox setting, and 3 months later they could be Orthodox. So that was a phenomenon that happened in the 80s. It was like a whole spiritual reawakening.
Yeah, that's what happened. I mean, it was an entire change of culture at that time, which was a really interesting point. And it was in the 80s, and then the 90s was how we grew up. We grew up pretty religious, but my parents were very good about letting you choose your path and letting you choose a way for you to awaken yourself. While you were going through that spiritual journey, people I always found that people will delineate and make a separation of church and state, of business and religion. But now you're on this path of deep spirituality, but you were constantly doing new things. So how did you pivot? And for people who are becoming religious, how are you able to bring religion into your workplace?
I take the personal message that I got seriously in all of its parts. And the first part is all paths are valid. Right. I mean, I was offered a way in to, I might even call the Jesus Christ that I experienced a Bodhisattva.
Okay.
And a Bodhisattva, is a Buddhist concept. A Bodhisattva is somebody who has given themselves up in the afterlife to help others. And so in a way, I might say that that's sort of what I encountered. I encountered an energy that is available and that was made available to me. But I've never left behind the piece that all paths are valid. And within that, I even include humanism, and atheism. Some of the most profoundly spiritual people I've met were actually atheists, believe it or not, who I met in divinity school. So in terms of bringing what I experienced to my work, it basically came down to upping the ante for myself on seeing each individual as such. Not as there's a term in research where people who go through surveys are called POS, pieces of sample, and POS obviously stands for something else as well, right? And one of the values of my company is that we look to each person that we're receiving information from as an individual that has validity and importance and, a human being. And in terms of how it changed in my own work environment, I was very clear with the people around me that I had no need to make anybody do anything different than what they were doing. But I did let everyone know this is what has happened to me. Some people would be drawn by that to want to talk about it. Some people wanted to share their own experiences that were, confusing or powerful and not confusing. But others just, went about their lives. And I think one of the things, in going back to some of these old journals recently, that most changed for me was I allowed myself less time being angry at people. My journals before this experience were so full of my rants about my employees, and my partner, for that matter, my judgment of them. And I simply come at those issues quite differently now.
I think once you know that there's a higher power that's directing, and we have a strong belief that everything happens to us for the good, that God is directing, God is running running the world and is in charge of the world. And even if we have limited vision on what we can know, so even if something looks bad to us, maybe it's good for the good. Maybe you got just a simple example, you're in a traffic jam and you're cursing and you're so angry, but yet if you had continued going, the bridge would have collapsed and you could have been killed. So that's an extreme example, but that's a strong belief in Judaism as well. And once you accept that and you can think that there's an overriding reason, an overriding purpose, and that's only good for you, then your anger goes away, because why would you be angry at anything? This is the right thing. This is good. This is the best thing for me. I'm limited. It's my restriction, my limitation, that I can't see it, but I have to know, and that's where faith comes in. That's where you have to know that it's all right for the good, and just relax.
And I just had speaking to your point, Dad, I just had this, I was just in Israel yesterday, and we don't timestamp because who knows when we release, but I had this experience a few days ago when I went up to the northern border in Israel, and everybody's been focusing on helping the south and what's going on the border and the displaced people and the Palestinians and the Druze. They're all, the Druze community, the Muslim community is getting really hurt really badly. So I help bring food for that. It's horrible what's going on in the south. But the north of Israel has 60,000 Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, and Hindus that are displaced. There's an entire town of just Druze who or Muslim that are displaced, like one of the biggest towns in Israel. And so I went up to bring gear up there and food, and I stopped whenever I saw people. I stopped and I gave them chocolates. I brought people like American chocolates in Israel. They get really excited. So, and everyone's saying, "Oh, it's dangerous. It's dangerous. Hezbollah is shooting in every single day. You're going to get killed." I don't think like that. So I go up there, and I go to bring gear for a bunch of my friends who are the soldiers there, and I brought gear, whatever, and we took pictures, and it was a great time. And for a few minutes, you didn't even think about it. It's a beautiful sun, and I leave, and 20 minutes later, I get a video from my friend that brought me into there to bring gear to his unit, and I was on the, you're talking about the border of Lebanon, like the border where they're attacking. 20 minutes later, he sends me a video of his tank that I was just standing on shooting at Hezbollah because Hezbollah just shot rockets at them. And if it was 20 minutes later, I would have been there. And I'm not the most careful, but it's because I have this, and it's an understanding that, oh, I was late for this, or this happened, and whatever it is, and you're just able to give yourself to a higher power and let what life will be. What I love and what I love that you were saying is that you understood that all paths are accepted. And when you're doing these studies and you're doing listening and active listening, you make it not about you anymore. You allow people to just live this life. And it's turned into your success. We say in sales all the time, who are the best salespeople in the world? The best listeners. The ones who talk all the time aren't the best salespeople. Entrepreneurs in general, business owners, are salespeople. Because if you don't have any revenue, your business is not going to make it. There's entrepreneurs with great ideas, but the first thing you have to understand is, how am I going to get customers? So the first stage, and just action plan is first stage, is do some market research. Find out what is the market asking for you.
Right.
Listen to the market. Walk around, talk to as many people as you can before you start a business. And then if there's enough need and there's enough and the numbers make sense that you can be in there, you can solve that problem. And then you can insert yourself in the middle, and that can turn you into a profit. Not biblical profit, money profit, sorry, to be more on this world. And that's really the key of entrepreneurship, is first the listening. And it sounds like because of that awakening that you had, that you realized, I have to listen, you use that and turn that into your business together, which many people do not bring business into their spiritual life.
Right. Yeah. And I don't see them as separate. I was, pushed along the way, right? The occasional nudge, and the occasional nudges led me to get a Master of Divinity degree, led me to go to seminary and be ordained as an interfaith minister, and also led me into being credentialed as a spiritual counselor. And it's kind of like only on the other side of all that I'm like, whoa, this is interesting, because in some ways this is what I'm already doing, right? But this is a way of doing it that is more oriented towards individuals than towards businesses.
So what's the path that you would recommend for individuals? And what's the goal that you're setting for the individuals that you're coaching?
Well, I think a lot about, and this is partly just because I've been in an entrepreneurial community for so long in the Entrepreneurs Organization in New York, EONY. And I see in this group of people a lot of spiritual hunger. And at the same time, I see in this group of people very often a growth mindset that isn't just about growing their business, that is also about growing themselves as people, as fathers, as mothers, as wives, as husbands, as friends. And so I'm excited for that particular audience to provide some tools to help with that. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but suddenly psychedelics are a huge, huge trend in the entrepreneurial community, which is pretty interesting.
And microdosing.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? Taking small amounts of like magic mushrooms. That's what Elon Musk said he does, which I don't know how it's sustainable. a
How
lot
does that
longer.
work exactly? Like you're
It like
bored in
hyper
the woods and
focuses
you
you.
take a mushroom or something? How does that
Yeah, it's like small amounts of mushrooms over
do
time.
what? What's the purpose?
It,
Just
it
to,
hyper focuses you, gives you clarity, gives you perspective.
Yeah, and this is not my personal gig, psychedelics not my personal gig. Again, though, all paths are valid. But I think that interest in that community is partly about that growth mindset, that desire to grow as a person. And spirituality, I do think, can provide that for people, whether or not they take that path, or whether they take a meditation path, or whether they, really connect to their faith in that way. And so I spent some time as a student really thinking about spiritual practice. And I also did some research to find out how spiritual practice affects people. And what I learned from surveys is that those who have some form of regular spiritual practice are frankly more resilient than those who don't. They feel less stressed, they feel more connected, and they feel more able to handle the bumps in the road. So I started looking at spiritual practice across the whole variety of ways in which people approach spirit. And I can say approach God. I mean, I certainly, but there are some people, when you use the word God with them, it's like you're talking about a boyfriend that used to beat them up. Some people really don't want to go towards that word. I'm very comfortable with it. I use it myself all the time. But what I developed was essentially a matrix of 10 different spiritual practices that are valid, that are seen across a whole wide range of spiritual traditions. The ones that we most think of, at least in the United States, are meditation, which is hard. It's incredibly fruitful. It gives people a lot of benefit, but for a lot of people, they find it really difficult to develop a meditation practice. And the other is prayer. Everybody knows about that, but that's particularly hard if you don't think you're talking to anyone, right? If you don't think there's anybody on the other end of the line, that's not a conversation that's an easy one to have. But there are other forms of spiritual practice that you can see across all sorts of areas. One is being in nature. It's very well shown to increase people's feelings of connection. One is gratitude. That's kind of the baseline.
It's a big part of our certification, which is behavioral financial advisory, is having gratitude and guiding people through that.
And the research on gratitude is really clear that those who have a regular gratitude practice lead happier lives. You talk about these moments when people need to pivot in order to continue to grow a business, in order to continue to grow their living. And it is easier to do that for folks if they're grateful about where they've been, not just angry about it, right? One is chanting. There are body practices that when people, and almost most religions are using some form of prayer that has that use of the voice, but chanting has been shown to be very, very powerful for people. One is moving the body, sacred dance. And a variety of other ways that one can approach spiritual practice. So with the handful of people that I'm currently working with as sort of a spiritual coach, and I use the word coach or counselor, depending on what they want. For instance, I have a very spiritual client who is an older woman. And that, by the way, is another audience that I'm very interested in serving, because I think that I see it in women in my life who have reached to a certain age, that there's often almost a flowering of wanting to feel more connected.
I would say my grandmother's in that, dad, your mother-in-law.
I'm not sure. When she says older women, I'm not sure if she means that old.
I do, though. I actually do.
What's the age limit on?
Yeah, no. Well, I think the age limit is when you can't really talk anymore, right?
She can talk.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So, interestingly, those are the two audiences that I've been most drawn to, is women who are continuing to want to explore their spirituality and strengthen their spirituality, who are older, and entrepreneurs who, range in age, but are mostly dudes, at least the ones that I know. And, for those folks, if a regular spiritual practice, which can, be coached, because I can help people sort of move through finding what works for them, but can also be counseled, which is generally around, I'm simply going to listen and help somebody move through whatever it is that they're working through. These things can really lead to a happier life, just as
A better life.
Yeah. I mean, I see spiritual fitness as being in many ways similar to physical fitness, right?
Absolutely.
Or for that matter, mental fitness. And physical fitness, you have more resilience, you have more stamina, you have more strength, right? You're able to help others more, perhaps. Similarly with being spiritually fit.
So it's amazing that you're interconnecting them. And I do find the number one of all CEOs and CFOs of Fortune 500 companies, people, entrepreneurs, they all say the first thing is you got to exercise. We had Jen Cohen on the podcast, who's bigger, badder, bolder. And her first thing was exercise every single day. And she's built a huge company, huge followings, one of the biggest podcasts in the country because of that, leading with that strength. It's amazing that you can also take, and I really like what you're saying, that you could take spiritual fitness and guide people through it. And it's not foreign. When you say spiritual counseling, a lot of people think, oh, okay, we're going to sit down and we're going to pray, but it's not really it's really having the connectivity, because there's blocks, and having connectivity to something that's more than yourself. Once you do that, we find those people a lot more successful.
I would say
Absolutely.
even more. I would say even more than that. It's really connecting with yourself to know who you are. What really resonated with me was when you said that when you first got diagnosed, you went for your inner resources and you didn't have. So I think, to me, it's all tied together. It's to combine the physical. You have to have physical fit, you have to be mentally fit, and you have to be spiritually fit. And that means inside yourself, you have to know who you are, what you're all about, and how you fit in, and that you do fit into the greater scheme, which is run by a greater power that's in charge of things, not you. You're not in charge of it. You can only do so much. And when things don't go how you think it should go, you're okay with that too, because you are fit. You are physically, spiritually, and mentally fit.
And because you're resilient, right? Because you're resilient. Things didn't go the way that I wanted them to, but I've got the will and the ability and the support from a spiritual perspective to be able to pick myself up and,
Yeah, I mean, well,
else.
you're proven that you've done it yourself, and you've obviously proven success over your multiple companies. What would be a few tips that you would give somebody who's just listening in and just going, you know what, how do I start doing this? I can't commit to a coach. I can't commit, but I feel like I'm missing something in my life, and I just want to take 2 or 3 steps towards that.
My first step would be a simple gratitude practice. And when I say a practice, that means that you do it regularly. I know some people who do this as a family, and that's wonderful. For me personally, my gratitude practice is when I walk, I thank. And I walk about 5 miles a day. I have 2 big dogs, so I walk about 5 miles a day. But when I walk, I thank. It's become a muscle memory, right? So I might walk out of my apartment and have sort of a cloud over my head. But after I've taken about 10 steps, I'm like, I'm walking. I should be thanking. What can I be grateful for?
So just to let you know that, I mean, for Judaism, we're supposed to pray with 10 men 3 times a day. The prayers are all about gratitude. It's all about acknowledging gratitude that what you're giving to me and what I'm acknowledging. And I would even say something further. I would say that, when you think about it, really overcoming this and being resilient and recognizing that, is actually what we're here for. That's what it's all about. The rest of it is just frustration. But what we're really here about is those times when it gets difficult and how we resolve it.
Absolutely. And so in that walking and thanking for me, right, I don't create any rules for myself. I'm perfectly happy giving thanks for the same thing every day. I am always grateful that I am married to somebody that I love so deeply and that we have a wonderful relationship. I am always grateful that my 2 dogs are so beautiful. I'm always grateful that I am able to walk. These are things that are going to always come up for me, but there's always something else, right? There's some kindness that somebody did for me the day before, or something delicious that I got to taste. But just having a regular daily gratitude practice has been shown scientifically to actually shift mindset. So that would be my step one.
And step two would be what?
My step two.
I like that we did step one and walking. I just like
step
that.
one and walking.
It was just good. It worked out well.
Yeah. My step two would depend a little bit on who you are as a person. If you are a praying person, my step two, for somebody who believes in prayer, for somebody for whom prayer feels good, my step two would be to pray for someone else. And if you're not a praying person, it would be to include at least one act of service in every day. And that could be picking a piece of garbage up off the ground and putting it in the, receptacle. I pick up a lot of dog shit.
Two big dogs.
Well, I pick up a lot of other people's dog shit is what I'm talking about. Because that is a really easy service to provide if you happen to have dog bags in your pocket and you happen to be in New York City. I give to all who ask if I have small change. I do not judge the asking. I started that as a practice. It's now about 15 years ago as an experiment, because I would give to people. Ooh, internet connection.
No, continue.
I would give to people, but I would think about whether their story had moved me. I don't do that anymore. If somebody asks if I have a handful of change, if I have $1, I give. But some act of service every day, and to then give thanks that you were able to do it. And if you are able to, meditation is, very scientifically shown to be incredibly good for the mind, for the body, and for the soul and spirit. And meditation is essentially, when you get right down to it, there's a lot of different kinds. There's a lot that's available in terms of tapes that you can listen to, in terms of videos that you can participate with. It doesn't have to be very long. You can do short meditation and still receive benefit from that. But the primary thing is that you are stopping the ongoing narrative rant that's in your mind, giving it a little bit of a break. And when you get a little more practiced at it, getting yourself into a different brainwave set. But even if you're not going to get to that level of practice, just occasionally giving your brain that break can be very powerful.
It's very deep. And I love taking what you're talking about and looking at things and how would you say the religious perspective on money is, and how would you say it for us? It's really goes hand in hand. We give the number one. I was talking to a client of mine, he's a very successful investment banker, and we were talking about giving charity. And for people, when they start making a lot of money and they do really well, they start getting this ego in them. He said the only antidote for that ego is giving charity. It's the only way to solve that. We do it on this podcast all the time. We'll be donating to a charity of your choice. I really like the random people giving. That's something I actually take into practice myself. Anybody who asks me for money, I always give them. I don't judge. It's the level of amount that I give, but I always give, regardless. So how would you look at money, and then how can people find you? So those are the two last questions I have for you.
Okay. There's a lot of spiritual teachers who will make the same suggestion, which is that the idea that there's anything inherently evil or wrong with money is sort of missing the point of what money is. That money, like conversation, that money, like food, is energy. And that it does not diminish by being shared. So I think seeing money as energy and having a positive attitude toward that energy, but just as an act of service, one would give one's energy. You talked about, going to a place that was a dangerous place in order to provide, your own good energy and the things that you had brought to people that you cared about and to people who were just fellow human beings. So I do think that having money should also mean giving money. And many religious traditions have essentially a tithing element of, give 10% or whatever percent of what you receive, but mostly see it as energy, as neither a reward for how special you are, because you and we are human beings who have equal value to other human beings, nor as something that has been taken from others. But, if you earn money because you've expended energy and received energy, this can be a very spiritual experience.
Yeah, it's very deep. If you look at money as something I view it all the time as when I started doing better, I became more and more religious.
That's interesting.
As my business built better and cleaner, I became a cleaner and better person. And that's really, they've been interconnected, and we do that. That's part of the reason why me and my dad work so well together, because we are who we are. We are transparent, and he knows me, I know him. We're not lying. If you, the expression is, if you always tell the truth, you don't have to remember the truth, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Dad, do you remember that line?
You don't get tangled up in your own lies.
You never get tangled up in your own.
You tell so many lies, sometimes you don't remember what's true.
Yeah, that's a different line. Yeah, that's a similar line. But how do people find you? How do people connect? How do people get in touch with you?
Thank you, Yair. I would say, given the topic
you tell so many lies, sometimes you don't remember
our conversation
what's true.
today, I have a number of different emails, but the one that I would give is Robin, ROBIN, at spiritfit.com.
Very nice. And I want to say first, thank you so much for going so deep with us today. It's something that we really enjoy. It's something that is big values of ours. We say it all the time. My dad wears a yarmulke every single day. We don't care that people don't like the Jews. We're showing religion. That's religion first, love first. That's what we're doing. We're very proud people for who we are, and we're very proud of our religious capacity and understanding that there's more than just us. And it's been a practice of ours to constantly give back, to be grateful for how amazing. I say it to my dad all the time. We're like, what other business? This is amazing. Like, who we're talking to is amazing. This podcast has been such an opening experience for us, and it's not necessarily the profitable part of the business, but it is something that we're learning so much and we're so grateful for. So we take what you do and put into practice without practicing it, but it's just part of our lives. And I think the more you do that, the more successful you'll be. So I want to thank you again so much for coming and sharing some of your wisdom. And I love your resilience, and we really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.